Good morning, and thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we are continuing our study of David's Psalms, particularly the ones that connect to him historically. As we introduced yesterday, we're going to be looking at a few of the 73 Psalms that David wrote in the hymn book, the Psalm book, that have historical references in the superscription. A little note at the top of the Psalms that you often find. Those are part of the text. It's important to read those. But as we said yesterday, we want to begin and end the series with two Psalms that have no notations because I believe they go to the deepest part of David and they make perfect bookends for our study. We're going to begin with Psalm 23 today. To me, Psalm 23, Psalm 103, and Psalm 131 really get to the essence of David and his heart. He's the man after God's own heart. David Golden preached a couple of Sundays ago on David's heart. How do I get a heart like that? If you didn't get to hear that sermon, I suggest you go to the website and listen to it. It was a wonderful sermon. And David said something about David that I will quote for the rest of my life. He said David's life was an open book, and that's absolutely true. Beyond that, though, David's heart is an open book. David really shares with us who he is, all his frailties, all his worries and his doubts, and all of his expectations and confidences, everything that he is. He doesn't hide anything from us because he knows he can't hide it from God. And so we've been very blessed with his literary output, with the words that he left for us. I always wish I knew what these songs sounded like when he sang them and played them. He was the sweet singer of Israel, the Bible calls him, and he was also a master musician on the 8-stringed lyre. And I would just have loved to have heard him sing and play. You know what this sounds like. We love Psalm 23 for a reason. It just, without us knowing why, reaches us in a way almost nothing else does. And let's just read it. We could quote it together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil because you're with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy, loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is just it's a jewel. I mean, it's a more exquisite jewel than any other brief thing that we can think about. It has fewer words than the Gettysburg Address and says so much more. It has such emotional, spiritual depth. This is a song about his relationship with God. Let us notice something that he does in almost all of his Psalms. David talks to us directly, and he talks to God directly. And so something that David accomplishes in his songs is to put one arm around us while he reaches out his hand to God. And so he's the connection between us and God, connecting us directly through his God-inspired word to God. Let's notice something else. At the beginning of the song, David is a lamb being led by God. God is his shepherd. So he's moving. He's moving from pasture to pasture, going to the quiet waters, having to go through the valley of the shadow of death. He's on the move, but God's there. But by the end of the psalm, God is no longer the shepherd. He's the host in the house. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. So God is transitioning now from being shepherd to host. We have the feeding in the first part, the feeding in the second part, the green pastures, the table of God, and we end with him living in God's house as God's child, as God's guest. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We also see in this psalm just a couple of phrases that tell us that David is not an Old Testament man the way they all are. All the rest of them are. He's not like anybody else in the Old Testament. He has a New Testament sensibility. He has a messianic consciousness and an eschatological consciousness. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. What does that even mean? I'm not sure, other than that David is communicating, I'm key to God's plan, and I know this. And so I trust that God's going to really take care of me. And of course he is, because he's going to be the forefather of Jesus. Jesus sits on the throne of David. And then his eschatological consciousness. He knows about reward, about paradise, in a way no one doesn't. And even in his darkest hour, when the first child he has with Bathsheba dies, he says, he can't come to me, but I can go to him. He has an eschatological consciousness, an understanding that no one else in the Old Testament has, that heaven awaits those who belong to God. And then there's this, and this is why I wanted to start. This is the key to me, the key to David, is that first phrase, Yahweh is my shepherd. When we think about him as a little boy who was still, as he's described in Samuel, pink and pretty, he's in no way masculine. He's not gone through puberty yet. His voice hasn't changed. And he's a young man alone with his few sheep. And as he describes to Saul in chapter 17, he's had to rescue the flock from a lion and a bear, and he's killed a lion and a bear, and he even grabbed the lion by the mane, he talks about. You have a young man alone, frightened, trying to protect the flock whenever he's just a boy, and then making the realization that he isn't alone, that he has a shepherd, and that shepherd is God, that God is always with him, and that God will take care of him no matter where he goes, that he can rely on God completely, that God will make him lie down in green pastures, God will take him to the quiet waters, that he can't escape going through the valley of the shadow of death, but he's not afraid because God is with him. It's that realization of God's presence, that experience of God's presence, and the dearness, the high value he places on that knowledge, that thing that he feels palpably, that God is here and I belong to him, that I think is the key to understanding everything else about David. Well, thank you for joining me for what is now nearly 8 good minutes with the Word. Tomorrow we're going to talk about Psalm 3.